Hey, my name is Caleb. I'm 32 years old and I live in Millhaven, Tennessee. It's a small town. The kind where everybody knows what truck you drive and nobody asks where you're going. I like it that way. I've always liked it that way. I'm a carpenter. Not the kind that builds furniture for showrooms or refinishes kitchen cabinets for people in Nashville. The kind that builds actual structures, framing, roofing, rough work mostly. The kind of job where you come home with sawdust in your collar and a specific kind of tired that lives in your shoulders and doesn't leave until Thursday. It's not the kind of job that makes for good stories at dinner parties. But I was never much for dinner parties anyway. My day starts at 5:15. Coffee in a travel mug I've dropped so many times the lid doesn't seal right anymore. The drive to whatever site we're working takes 20 minutes if I hit the one light green. I know every crack in that road. I know which curve smells like pine in the morning and which stretch the radio cuts out on. Small things. But when your life gets quiet enough, small things are what you have. I live in a house I mostly built myself. Mostly. There's a back room, the one that was supposed to be a study, that still has bare insulation and exposed framing. I told myself I'd get to it. That was 2 years ago. The door stays closed now. It doesn't bother me the way it used to. Or maybe it does and I stopped checking. My wife's name was Diane. She died 26 months ago. Ovarian cancer. We had 2 years from diagnosis to the end, which sounds like a long time until you're living it and realize 2 years is just long enough to lose her twice, once while she was still there, and once when she wasn't. I kept her garden. That probably sounds sentimental for a man who describes himself mostly in terms of lumber grades and load-bearing walls. But it wasn't sentiment, exactly. It was more like, stopping felt worse. She'd planted it the spring before the diagnosis. Tomatoes, zucchini, a row of marigolds along the fence she said kept the bugs off. I kept watering it through that first winter even when there was nothing left to water. Just the habit of it. The shape of a thing she'd started. I wasn't looking for anything to change. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't lonely in the way people imagine, sitting by a window, waiting. I was just living in a smaller version of my life and finding that it fit well enough. Then my neighbor Ray called me on a Wednesday evening in October. Ray is 71 years old and he has never in his life asked for anything directly. He'll say, I was thinking, when he means, I need, and, I was wondering, when he means, you're going to do this. So when he said he was thinking about a young woman who needed a place to stay for a few weeks, someone connected to his late wife's family, a situation, he said, that was complicated, I already knew I wasn't being asked a question. I said I had the spare room. He said he figured I might. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a while, looking at the counter. 2 plates in the drying rack. 1 mug. The particular quiet of a house that only has one person in it. I didn't know anything about her yet. I didn't know about the child. I didn't know what complicated meant, in Ray's specific use of the word. I went to bed. Got up at 5:15. Made coffee in the leaking mug. 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, a 10-year-old Civic pulled into my driveway and everything got complicated. The Civic had a cracked taillight and a dent along the passenger door that looked like it had been there long enough to rust at the edges. It sat in my driveway for a full minute before anyone got out. I was on the porch. I hadn't planned to be on the porch. I'd told myself I'd just be inside, normal, and they could knock. But I'd ended up on the porch anyway with a cup of coffee I wasn't drinking. The driver's door opened first. She was smaller than I expected. Not short exactly, just compact in the way of someone who had learned to take up less space than she was entitled to. Dark hair pulled back loose, strands coming free at the sides. She was wearing a gray sweater that had been washed too many times and jeans with a fraying hem. She had a duffel bag over one shoulder that was clearly heavy by the way she adjusted it twice before she'd even closed the car door. Her eyes went to me first. Not warm, not cold. Measuring. Then she turned back to the car and opened the rear door. The little girl climbed out on her own. 5 years old, Ray had told me. She was wearing a purple jacket with the zipper half done and light-up sneakers that flashed pink and blue with every step. She looked at the house. She looked at the porch. She looked at me. She did not smile. She just looked, with the specific patience of a child who has learned that new places require assessment before reaction. Her name was Lily. The woman's name was Nora. She told me that standing at the bottom of my porch steps, the duffel still on her shoulder, Lily holding the hem of her sweater with 2 fingers. Not her hand. Just the hem. I said it was good to meet her. She said the same. Neither of us was performing warmth and we both knew it, and that was, I think, the first thing we had in common. I showed them the spare room. It had a full bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the side yard and the fence line where Diane's marigolds had been. I'd put a folding cot in the corner for Lily without being asked. Nora looked at it for a moment. She set the duffel down on the bed. She said, "Ray told you about Lily." I said he'd mentioned her. She said, "Her mother is my sister. She's been gone 7 months. Nobody knows where." She said it the way you say something you've had to say too many times, flat, factual, the emotion worn off the surface of it. "I have temporary custody. It's being finalized. That's why I need somewhere stable for a few weeks while the paperwork processes." I said I understood. She looked at me like she was checking whether I actually did. Then we worked out the arrangement. Her room, her schedule, her privacy. We'd split the kitchen by time, she had mornings, I had evenings, we'd figure out the middle. I told her I left before 6 and was usually back by 4:30. She said she was looking for work and would be in and out. I said that was fine. She asked one question before she agreed. She asked if I had anyone coming in and out of the house regularly. I said no. She said, "All right." Not grateful. Not relieved. Just, all right. Like a door being latched. Lily spent those first 3 days watching me from whatever room she was not in. I'd feel it, that careful 5-year-old attention, and look up and she'd be in a doorway, or at the edge of the kitchen, just watching. Not afraid. Just deciding. I didn't push it. I know enough about things that need time to know that pushing doesn't help. I just went about my business and let her decide at her own pace. The first drawing appeared on a Tuesday. I found it outside the workshop door when I came in from the site, a piece of notebook paper folded in half, set down carefully enough that it hadn't blown away. I picked it up. It was a house. Crayon, mostly brown and yellow, with a sun in the corner that took up about 1/3 of the sky. 2 figures in front of the door. One tall, one small. The tall one had what I think was supposed to be a tool belt. I stood there in my work boots looking at it for longer than I probably should have. I didn't say anything to Lily about it. I set it on my workbench, up against the wall where it wouldn't get buried under sawdust. The next morning there was another one. A truck. Recognizably my truck, down to the color, though she'd drawn the wheels slightly square. I put that one next to the first. By Friday there were 4. Nora and I had found a rhythm by then. Not a warm one, more like 2 people sharing a kitchen who'd agreed on the traffic pattern without discussing it. She made coffee before I was up. I left the porch light on if I was going to be late. She restocked the dish soap without mentioning it. I fixed the bathroom faucet that had been dripping since I moved in without mentioning it either. Small adjustments. The kind that don't mean anything on their own. It was a Wednesday evening, about 2.5 weeks in, when she laughed. I was trying to get the stuck kitchen drawer open. The one on the left side of the sink that had been swollen shut since August. I'd been ignoring it because it only had rubber bands and take-out menus in it and I didn't need rubber bands or take-out menus. But Nora had asked if we had scissors and I'd said I thought they might be in that drawer and then committed to opening it in front of her, which turned out to be a mistake. It didn't open. I pulled harder. It gave about 1 inch and then jammed. I got both hands on it and pulled again and the whole drawer came completely out of the cabinet and the contents, rubber bands, 4 take-out menus, a birthday candle, 2 dead batteries, and 1 single chopstick, scattered across the kitchen floor. I stood there holding an empty drawer. And Nora laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a smile with sound attached to it. A real one, loud and sudden, the kind that filled the room before she could stop it. She put one hand over her mouth after, like she was surprised it had gotten out. But her shoulders were still shaking. Lily looked up from the table where she was coloring. She looked at her aunt. Then she looked at me holding the empty drawer. Then she went back to coloring as if this was all perfectly reasonable. I put the drawer on the counter. I looked at the chopstick on the floor. I said, the other one's probably in there somewhere. Nora laughed again, shorter that time, and turned back to the counter. But the line of her shoulders was different after that. Looser. Like something that had been braced for a long time had decided, just briefly, that it didn't need to be. I filed it away without examining it too closely. The way you notice a beam is plumb without stopping to think about why it matters. The touch happened 4 days later. We were fixing the side gate latch. She'd mentioned it was stiff and I'd said I'd look at it and then she'd come outside while I was looking at it, which I hadn't expected. She handed me the screwdriver before I asked for it. Our hands were both on it for 1 second, her passing, me taking, and neither of us moved for just slightly too long. I noticed. I didn't look up. I finished tightening the latch. She went back inside. I stood at the gate for a moment after, screwdriver in hand, looking at nothing in particular. There was a habit she had that I kept noticing. When she was thinking, really thinking, working something out, she'd press her thumb against the inside of her opposite wrist. Just hold it there. I didn't know why I kept registering it. I just did. It reminded me of something I couldn't name yet. The dinner was Nora's idea, which I think she regretted about 40 minutes in. Her family was passing through, her mother, her aunt, and her older brother Marcus, on their way back from somewhere else. Nora had mentioned it to me on a Thursday morning, standing at the counter with her coffee, in the careful tone of someone who had already decided something and was informing rather than asking. She said it would just be a few hours. Dinner. She'd cook. I said that was fine. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. They arrived at 5 on Sunday. Her mother's name was Patricia. She was a tall woman in a pressed blouse who looked at my house the way a building inspector looks at a structure she already suspects is not up to code. Her aunt smiled at everything with the particular warmth of someone recording details for later. Marcus shook my hand and spent the rest of the evening on his phone. Nora moved through the kitchen with the focused efficiency of someone managing more than a meal. I stayed out of the way. Lily sat at the kitchen table in her purple jacket, which she had refused to take off, the light-up sneakers flashing quietly under her chair every time she shifted. It was fine through the first hour. Careful and surface level, the way family dinners are when everyone has agreed without discussing it to stay in the shallow end. Then Patricia started. It began with small things. A comment about the house, said to her sister, not to me, but loud enough. A question to Nora about the custody paperwork framed in a way that made the process sound like a symptom rather than a solution. Then, you left a good position, Nora. A career. For this. Nora said, I left because Lily needed someone. Patricia said, there were other options. The table got quiet. Marcus looked up from his phone briefly then looked back down. Patricia set her fork down. She looked at Nora directly, and her voice dropped to the register people use when they want to cause damage without raising their volume. She said that everyone remembered what had happened at Nora's last job. That there had been questions about her judgment. That a child deserved stability from someone whose own record was clean. It was a specific kind of cruelty. The kind that uses true things as weapons by removing all the context that made them true. Nora's face didn't break. But her hand under the table pressed her thumb hard against her opposite wrist. I saw it. I was about to say something, I don't know what, something inadequate probably, when Lily looked up from her plate. She looked at me with those careful 5-year-old eyes. Then she said, in a perfectly ordinary voice, the way you'd state any simple fact, Dad, can I have more bread? The room stopped. Not dramatically. Just stopped. The way a job site goes quiet when something unexpected happens and everyone pauses to assess. Nora looked at Lily. Then she looked at me. She did not correct her. Patricia's mouth was open slightly. Her aunt had stopped smiling. Marcus put his phone face down on the table. I reached over and passed Lily the bread. I said, here you go, bug. Lily took a piece and went back to her dinner as if nothing had happened. Because for her, nothing had. She had just asked for bread. But the air in the room had rearranged itself completely. Patricia looked at Nora for a long moment. Nora looked back at her mother steadily, her hand flat on the table now, not hiding anything, not explaining anything either. I didn't speak for her. She didn't need me to. After a moment Patricia picked her fork back up. The dinner continued. Nobody said anything else that mattered. But something had shifted in the architecture of the evening. A load-bearing thing. The kind of change you can't see directly but you can feel in the floor beneath you. When they left an hour later, Nora stood on the porch and watched the taillights until they were gone. I stood beside her. Not behind her. Beside her. Neither of us said anything about what had happened. We didn't need to. Not yet. 4:48 a.m. Lily got sick 4 days later. Not dramatically sick. Just a fever that started in the afternoon and climbed through the evening the way fevers do with small children, slow enough that you keep thinking it's peaked, fast enough that by 8 o'clock you're standing in a doorway not knowing what to do with your hands. That was me. Standing in the doorway. Hands at my sides. Nora was on the bed beside Lily with a cool cloth and a thermometer and the specific calm of someone who has handled this before but is running on empty doing it. Lily was flushed and half asleep and kept asking for water in a small voice that sounded nothing like her usual careful silence. I went and got the water. Then I got a second cloth. Then I stood in the doorway again because I didn't know what else to do and the room felt like it didn't have space for my not knowing. Nora looked up at me at some point and said, "There's children's Tylenol in my bag. Front pocket." I got it. I handed it to her. Our hands did the same thing they'd done at the gate, 1 second too long, and this time neither of us acknowledged it because Lily was more important. By 10 o'clock the fever had come down 2 degrees. Lily was asleep. Nora came out to the kitchen and stood at the counter with her back to me, both hands flat on the surface, her head down. I put the kettle on without asking. She didn't move for a while. Then she said, to the counter, "I found the folder." I didn't answer right away. I knew which folder. I'd been covering the utilities since week 2. Not because she'd asked, she hadn't asked anything, that was the whole point, but because I'd seen her doing the math on her phone one morning with that particular stillness of someone whose numbers aren't working out. I put the folder in the kitchen drawer, the fixed one, with the receipts and a note that said covered through November, "Don't argue about it." She'd found it. She turned around. Her eyes were dry but her jaw was tight in the way of someone keeping them that way by effort. She said, "You should have told me." I said, "You would have left." She looked at me for a long moment. She said, "That's not your decision to make." I said, "I know." The kettle started. I poured 2 cups. I set one in front of her and kept one in my hands because I needed something to hold. She said, to her cup, "At my last job." What my mother said at dinner. She stopped. Started again. There was a child. I saw signs. I wrote the report and then I waited 1 day because I wanted to be certain and I wasn't certain enough and she stopped again. I said, "I know." She looked up. I said, "Ray told me." Not the details. Just enough. I looked at my cup. You did everything right except the timing. And the timing wasn't cruelty. It was caution. There's a difference. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, low and unplanned, the kind of thing that gets out before you've decided to say it, "I don't know how to do this. Any of this. I don't know how to be what she needs and I don't know what I'm doing here and I don't." She stopped. She looked at the counter like she wanted to take it back. I didn't move out of the way. I said, "I don't know when it started," and then I stopped too because the sentence had gotten ahead of me and I didn't know how to finish it without saying something I hadn't planned on saying. We stood there in the kitchen at 10:45 at night. Rain hitting the roof like gravel being thrown. 2 cups of tea getting cold. Neither of us finishing our sentences. She reached across the counter and put her hand over mine. Just that. Just her hand over mine. We stood like that until Lily called out from the other room, and we both went. 6 months later, the back room has drywall. I finished it in February, on a weekend when the cold had settled in hard enough that working outside wasn't an option. Lily sat on an overturned bucket and handed me screws one at a time with great seriousness, each one placed in my palm like she was completing a transaction that required precision. She told me the room needed a window seat. I said I'd think about it. She said she'd already thought about it and it did. There's a window seat now. It's not the kind of job that made sense on paper. I had other things to do, a list that had been waiting longer. But Lily had drawn a picture of it, a bench under a window with 3 cushions, because 3 was her number for things that were complete, and she'd left it on my workbench between the others, and I'd looked at it one morning before the sun was up and thought, all right. That's how most things happen now. In that order. Nora found work in March. A family services organization 2 towns over, not the same kind of work she'd done before, more administrative, less exposure. She drives 40 minutes each way. She comes home tired but not the same kind of tired she arrived with. That tired was the kind that lives in the chest. This one lives in the feet. Feet tired I can work with. Feet tired means the day was real and then it ended. The custody paperwork finalized in April. I went with them to the courthouse. I stood in the hallway while Nora and Lily went in. I heard Lily's light-up sneakers on the tile floor all the way down the corridor, flashing pink and blue, and then a door closed and it was quiet. When they came out, Lily walked to me first. She held up her hand. I gave her a high five. She examined her palm afterward like she was checking the quality of it. Nora looked at me over the top of Lily's head. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Patricia called twice after the dinner. I don't know what was said. It's not my business to know. What I know is that Nora got off the phone both times and came to find me wherever I was in the house, not to talk, just to be in the same room. I kept working. She'd sit nearby. After a while she'd get up and go do something else. That was enough. That was the whole thing. This morning I was up before 5. Old habit. I made coffee in a new mug. Lily picked it out, blue with a yellow handle, because those were the right colors apparently, and I took it out to the back porch. Diane's garden is still there along the fence line. The marigolds came back this spring on their own, the way they do, without being asked. I hadn't planted anything new. I just kept the ground clear and let them come back. Lily waters it every morning before school. She has assigned herself this task. Nobody asked her to. She just decided it was hers. This morning I watched her through the kitchen window. Purple jacket, light-up sneakers flashing in the early gray light. She had the small watering can in both hands, moving along the fence row with the deliberate pace of someone doing something important. She didn't know I was watching. She stopped at the end of the row and looked at the marigolds for a moment. Then she said something to them, low, that I couldn't hear through the glass. Then she came inside and put the watering can away and asked what was for breakfast. I looked at the garden through the window for a moment after she'd gone past me. I thought about what Ray had said on the phone that October evening. A situation, he'd said. Complicated. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't mention what complicated sometimes turns into, if you leave the door open and don't rush the thing and let it find its own level. I turned around and started making breakfast. The kitchen had 3 people's worth of noise in it now. Lily talking. Nora answering from the hallway. The particular sound of a house that has more than one person in it. I stood at the stove and listened to it. That was enough. That was everything.